So in your own career, you develop all these ideas
Mm-hmm.
about ethics, about doing the right
Mm-hmm.
thing. I mean, in your case, like where did it come from? In terms of like how much of it was, formal training when you heard, how much of it was mentoring by the editors you worked under early on? I mean, how do you
Well,
develop this set of
I think,
guidelines or principles for yourself?
you know, I think the guidelines and the ethics I developed were really developed primarily in my childhood. I think my mom and dad and my grandparents, they were poor, but they were really honest people. My hero when I was a kid, a young kid, was the Lone Ranger, truth, justice, and America. And he had his, trusty Native American friend. Unfortunately, his name was Tonto, which in Spanish translates to dummy.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Tonto. And so, but I liked what he did. He helped folks, and even watching those shows and those values. And then my high school journalism teacher, Art Gallegos, was very good. Talked a lot about ethics. And then I had three great mentors. Eric Brazil, who I've already talked about, who picked me out of the El Charrito market. And then I was about to quit journalism, actually, after I got to the Sacramento Bee, because I never could move up. I was being, kind of like pigeonholed. I felt like, folks didn't respect me because I had come from the Fresno Bee to the Sacramento Bee, and the whole terrible hierarchy that occurs within news organizations.
I know. I feel lucky that you're even speaking to me as somebody who's at the Modesto Bee.
But you start thinking. I was thinking about that, and I had this guy named Bill Endicott, who's again, I'm supposed to have lunch with him on Friday. But Bill was the former political Capitol Bureau chief for the Sacramento Bee, and he just took me under his wing. I remember the day he called me in, and he said, and I said, "Oh man, what did I do again?" He closed the door, and he says, "Why have they been keeping you on the sidelines covering this, penny ante stuff?" He goes, "You're really good." He says,
So what were you covering?
Politics. I was covering for Fresno and Modesto. And he says, "You're really good." He says, "You may be the best political writer in Sacramento." And he said, "I'm going to give you an opportunity. I believe in you." And, when you hear people believe in you and you look at their ethics and how they conduct themselves. And then Gregory Favre, the editor of the Sacramento Bee, senior vice president of McClatchy, he promoted me. I was essentially a recruiter. I was assistant managing editor, but I was essentially the recruiter, did special projects for him, edited special projects. It was kind of like the AME that was people do because they thought he's never going to go anywhere. He's a Latino sitting in the corner. He's never going to go anywhere. So when the Emmys job came open, nobody gave me a chance, and I didn't give myself much of a chance. I'd never run a budget, never supervised anybody, never done a review of anybody. I didn't have anybody reporting to me. And all of a sudden, out of a nationwide search, he chooses me to be managing editor. And I still ask him, "Why'd you choose me?" He said, I knew you would have to grow. But he said, "You had the ethical foundation that I was looking for. You were very principled, You had, and he said, I knew you wouldn't be the best managing editor I could hire at that moment." He said, "I knew you would be in about 2 years." And so, he taught me a lot about, the whole issues about race. I mean, this was he's a distant cousin of Brett Favre, but he says he doesn't know it. He pronounces his name Favre. Brett cousin Favre. Right. Yeah, he pronounced his name right. And he grew up in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, and Bill Endicott grew up in Kentucky, and Eric Brazil grew up on the other side of the tracks in Salinas. And why were these folks attracted to me? Why did they take me under their wing? And I think it's because we shared the same values, the same principles, the building blocks. We cared about people. We had passion for the business, and we had a lot of principles ingrained to us by our folks. And we talk about, to each one of them, all of them had their real ethical values set in their young childhood, which is, I think, the same way that and then honed by the people you hung around.
the one real follow-up I wanted to ask about this is, what did you do in terms of preventative measures after these serial fabrications were uncovered?
Yeah, we had Bob Steele come in from the Poynter Institute. We had, I did to do a series of stuff on ethics. We wrote policies, very explicit policies on, and handed them out to everybody who was on staff. Everybody I interviewed for a job from that point on, I talked to them about fabrication, plagiarism, made them sign before they started something that said, you know, if we fabricate, or we understand that fabrication or plagiarism is not part of, the DNA at the Sacramento Bee, and anything like that, you know, could lead to up to and including termination. So I took some really strong, both reactive steps to go back. See, this is the kind of thing that was weird, because I didn't think I had to explain that to people. It was, you know, I thought it should be part of the reporter or the editor's DNA. I thought this should have been ingrained in us through our careers or through journalism schools, or, you know, from my own perspective, through your own childhood. I thought that's what you came to journalism about, was to be about, you know, try to tell the truth as close to it as you could get.
Yeah, you know, when people asked me when I was reporting,
Yeah.
were you ever tempted? I said, you know, in a way, the challenge of the job is to write a good story with what you have and
That's right.
no more. You know, that it'd be like trying to write a 14-line sonnet in 15 lines. It's like, no, that's like the challenge is to write it in 14 lines. You know, it's like,
You know, I never tempted, but what I ended up doing is I always told myself I'm a good enough writer. If there's a hole, I'm going to write around it.
yeah.
And so if I don't have it, I'm going to write around it. And so, you know, in a way, I was still lazy, but I wasn't dishonest and lazy. And so, you know, just appalled me, you know, just surprised. I was just surprised how many people didn't think. And then when I was, before I was still editor, I had the dean of one of the journalism schools, a real prestigious journalism school in the country, called me and said, students these days don't see anything wrong with lifting stuff from the internet without attribution.
It's a remix, man.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I'm saying, oh wow. I mean, you know, teaching ethics now is more important than ever, because it's so easy in this internet age. You have so much information at your disposal. You say, okay, I'm going to lift it. Nobody's going to ever find it. Interestingly enough, it's easier to find stuff too, because you can run all kinds of programs to look for plagiarism too. And so, you know, students or journalists who are thinking they're being clever might end up wrecking their careers. Once you do something like that, you're pretty much blackballed. I mean, once you're fired for plagiarism or fabrication, you're gone. Even you could be one of the best writers in the country. You can be whatever. Time to go into fiction. You're not going to get back onto an organized journalism school. I'm not sure on a journalism site. Now, I'm not sure though. Is that going to change with the internet? Is that going to change with self-publication? Do the standards change nowadays? And it's a challenge that I think that we as educators now, and the current crop of editors and reporters and bloggers and people who are doing their own sites, is a challenge that discussion needs to be had.